Hello, friends. Welcome to Storycraft. On this channel, you will enjoy world top stories. Let's view the video. The untold story of Cleopatra's mysterious death. The queen of seduction and power, a child of royal blood, Cleopatra Xenophon, was born into the mighty Ptolemaic dynasty, a lineage of Macedonian Greeks that had ruled Egypt since the time of Alexander the Great. But unlike her predecessors, Cleopatra was different. She wasn't just a figurehead sitting on a throne. She was brilliant, cunning, and fiercely ambitious. From a young age, Cleopatra was trained in philosophy, science, politics, and languages. She could speak 9 of them, including Egyptian, a language her own family refused to learn. She was determined not just to rule Egypt, but to restore its greatness, beauty, brains, and ruthlessness. Cleopatra's allure went far beyond her physical appearance. Ancient writers often debated her beauty, but what truly captivated those around her was her voice, intelligence, and charisma. She knew how to manipulate power, and she used every tool at her disposal: charm, diplomacy, and even fear. At just 18 years old, she became co-ruler with her 10-year-old brother Ptolemy III. But soon, tensions rose. She refused to be overshadowed by a child king. Civil war erupted, and Cleopatra was exiled from Alexandria. But this was just the beginning of her rise. An entrance fit for a goddess, determined to reclaim her throne, Cleopatra took one of the boldest steps in history. Julius Caesar, the powerful Roman general, had arrived in Egypt. Instead of approaching him formally, Cleopatra had herself smuggled into his private chambers, rolled up in a luxurious carpet. When unrolled, she appeared before him like a vision of the goddess Isis. The audacity worked. Caesar was enchanted. The two formed an alliance that was both romantic and political. With his support, Cleopatra defeated her brother's forces and became the undisputed queen of Egypt. The power behind the throne, Cleopatra's relationship with Caesar, wasn't just about passion, it was strategy. Together, they had a son, Caesarion, whom she proclaimed as Caesar's legitimate heir. She traveled to Rome, lived in a lavish villa, and mingled with the Roman elite. But her presence scandalized Roman society. When Caesar was assassinated, in 44 BCE, Cleopatra was forced to return to Egypt, grieving yet calculating her next move. She now ruled alone, more powerful than ever, but surrounded by enemies who questioned her legitimacy and feared her influence. A queen like no other, Cleopatra ruled not only with intellect and charm, but with a deep understanding of symbolism. She portrayed herself as the reincarnation of Isis, aligning herself with divine power in the eyes of her people. She led religious ceremonies, reformed the economy, and strengthened Egypt's political ties. Unlike many women of her time, Cleopatra didn't rely on male advisors or hide behind a veil of royalty. She stood at the center of it all. And though powerful men came and went, Cleopatra remained the true force of nature. The legend had begun, but her fate would soon turn down a path filled with danger, betrayal, and ultimately, death. Rome's obsession with Egypt's last pharaoh. A queen returns alone. After the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE, Cleopatra returned to Egypt in mourning. Her dreams of a Roman-Egyptian empire through Caesarion now faced a world without Caesar. But Cleopatra was not the type to retreat. Instead, she reinforced her hold on Egypt, strengthening her armies and building her court into a fortress of luxury and strategy. In her mind, Rome hadn't seen the last of her, and it wouldn't be long before Rome came knocking again. The rise of a new Roman star back in Rome. Power was up for grabs. Caesar's death had left a vacuum, and his assassins, Brutus and Cassius, faced off against Caesar's allies. Out of the chaos emerged a rising power, Marcus Antonius, better known as Mark Antony. A fierce general and trusted ally of Caesar, Antony became one of the three rulers of Rome under the new triumvirate. His mission? To stabilize the eastern provinces, and that meant dealing with Cleopatra. When power meets passion in 41 BCE, Antony summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus in modern-day Turkey. But Cleopatra didn't just arrive. She made an entrance that would leave Rome breathless. Draped in gold and silks, she sailed up the river in a barge decorated like the vessel of Aphrodite. Perfume filled the air, musicians played enchanting melodies, and Cleopatra herself reclined beneath a canopy like a goddess. Antony was stunned. What began as a political meeting turned into a storm of passion. Cleopatra returned to Egypt, with Antony beside her. An alliance forged in desire. Cleopatra and Antony became inseparable. He spent the winter in Alexandria, indulging in Egypt's opulence and Cleopatra's magnetic charm. Their nights were filled with drinking games, disguises, and extravagant feasts. But their union was more than pleasure. It was power. Antony needed Egypt's wealth to fuel his ambitions in the east, and Cleopatra needed Roman strength to protect her throne. Their alliance was built on desire, but driven by survival. The world watches in suspicion. Back in Rome, whispers turned to roars. Antony, a Roman nobleman, was living like an Eastern king, entranced by a foreign queen. To quiet the outrage, Antony returned to Rome and married Octavia, sister of Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and future emperor. But the bond with Cleopatra was too strong. Antony abandoned Octavia and returned to Egypt, where he declared Caesarion as Caesar's true heir and granted territories to Cleopatra's children. Rome was furious. Octavian seized the moment, branding Cleopatra as a dangerous seductress, corrupting a Roman hero. Propaganda and the War of Hearts. Octavian launched a campaign to destroy Cleopatra's image. She was no longer just a queen. She was a threat to Roman values, a temptress wielding foreign magic to control Antony. Statues of her were defaced, poems mocked her, and rumors flew. The stage was set for war, not just between armies, but between two visions of the world, Rome's discipline and tradition, and Egypt's allure and decadence. Two worlds on a collision course. By now, Cleopatra and Antony weren't just lovers, they were partners in empire. But their world was built on fragile alliances and enemies with long memories. Cleopatra stood defiant, wrapped in jewels and silks, but the tide was shifting. Rome was gathering its forces, and Octavian had one goal: destroy Cleopatra and anyone who stood with her. The obsession had turned into a declaration of war. The fall of Alexandria. A kingdom under siege. By 32 BCE, tension between Rome and Egypt had reached a breaking point. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, declared war, not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. It was a strategic move, framing the conflict as a war against a foreign queen stirred Roman pride and turned public opinion in his favor. Across the Mediterranean, legions prepared for battle, and Cleopatra's once glorious empire braced for impact. Alexandria, the pearl of the Nile, was about to become a battlefield. Antony's last gamble. Antony gathered his forces along the Greek coast, hoping to meet Octavian at sea. His fleet, bolstered by Cleopatra's ships, was grand but outmatched in discipline and coordination. At the heart of this conflict were two men shaped by Caesar, Octavian with his cold precision and calculated mind, Antony with his fiery ambition and reckless bravery. In September 31st BCE, the two finally met. Off the coast of Actium, what followed was one of history's most decisive naval battles. The Battle of Actium. As warships clashed on the Ionian Sea, the sky darkened with smoke. Cleopatra commanded her fleet from a golden barge in the rear. But as Antony's forces faltered and confusion spread, Cleopatra made a stunning move. She turned her ships and fled. Some say it was prearranged. Others believe she panicked. Seeing her retreat, Antony abandoned the battle and followed. His soldiers, leaderless and demoralized, surrendered. Octavian had won the war without even stepping into Egypt. A city in despair. The news of Actium's defeat spread like wildfire. Alexandria, once radiant and full of life, turned anxious and cold. The markets fell silent. Foreign diplomats vanished. Cleopatra barricaded herself within the palace walls, determined to prepare for the worst. She gathered her treasures, negotiated with allies, and planned a possible escape. Yet deep down, she knew Rome was coming, and this time there would be no escape wrapped in a carpet. A love unraveled. Antony, once a fearless commander, became a shadow of his former self. He drank heavily, haunted by defeat and consumed with guilt. Cleopatra tried to revive his spirit, but their dream of an empire was crumbling. They built a mausoleum in secret, a towering tomb that would serve as their final sanctuary if all else failed. It was a grim reminder that their love story was now tied to death. The Iron Fist of Rome. In August 30th BCE, Octavian's legions finally reached the gates of Alexandria. Antony led a desperate charge with the remnants of his army, but it was a hopeless fight. As Roman soldiers entered the city, Antony received false news that Cleopatra had taken her life. Heartbroken and lost, he fell on his sword in a botched suicide attempt. Mortally wounded, he was carried to Cleopatra's hidden chamber, where he died in her arms, bleeding, broken, and defeated. Cleopatra alone. With Antony gone, Cleopatra stood alone at the edge of history. Octavian demanded her surrender. She refused to be paraded in a Roman triumph, chained like a trophy. Yet she stalled, negotiating, deceiving, and plotting one last act of defiance. In the silence of her mausoleum, surrounded by gold, perfumes, and the scent of death, she would make her final move, one that would echo through time and spark legends for centuries. The serpent, the poison, or the plot. The prisoner queen. Cleopatra was no longer a ruler, but a prisoner within her own palace. After Antony's death, Octavian took control of Alexandria. Guards surrounded Cleopatra's quarters. She was stripped of her power, her allies were dead or surrendered, and her empire was no more. Yet Cleopatra was not broken. Behind her jeweled facade, her mind was racing. She knew Octavian wanted her alive, not to honor her, but to humiliate her before the Roman people. Cleopatra vowed she would never be paraded through the streets of Rome in chains. Octavian's offer. Octavian visited Cleopatra, expecting a woman defeated. Instead, he found a queen dressed in royal splendor, standing tall. She tried to negotiate, not for her life, but for the future of her children. Caesarion, her son by Julius Caesar, was hidden far away. Her other children, fathered by Antony, were too young to understand the danger. Octavian gave no assurances. In his cold silence, Cleopatra saw her fate. She would not live to see Rome, but how she died would be entirely her choice. The preparation for death. Cleopatra began to prepare. She tested various poisons on prisoners to discover which caused the least suffering. Snake venom, she learned, brought a calm, painless end, if administered properly. She studied ancient texts, consulted her doctors, and readied herself for her final act. At the same time, she adorned her mausoleum with treasures, scrolls, and symbols of her reign. Her death would not be a surrender. It would be a statement. The final performance. On August 12th, 30th BCE, Cleopatra dined with her most loyal servants. Afterward, she dressed in ceremonial robes of white linen and gold. She wore her royal crown, applied her signature scent of myrrh, and adorned herself in jewels once meant for triumph. Then she sent a message to Octavian. Cleopatra was dead. When his guards broke in hours later, they found her lifeless body, along with two of her attendants, Iris and Charmian, who lay beside her in death. The mystery of the method beside Cleopatra was a small basket of figs, innocent in appearance but believed to conceal an asp, the deadly Egyptian cobra. A tiny puncture mark on her arm fueled the story. Yet no snake was found. Some say she used a poison hidden in a hairpin. Others claim it was a vial of liquid toxins smuggled past the guards. Roman historians argued over the details, and no account fully agreed. The truth was buried with her. Octavian's silence. Octavian was furious. He had lost his living trophy, but he understood the power of her death. He ordered her burial beside Antony, granting her final wish. He then declared Caesarion dead and took her remaining children to Rome. There they would be raised not as royalty, but as spoils of war. Cleopatra's legacy, however, refused to die. Her death was not merely the end of a queen, it was the birth of a legend. The question that remains. Did Cleopatra truly die by snakebite? Or was she helped, perhaps even forced into death by Octavian's agents to prevent rebellion? Was it a carefully crafted suicide, or a Roman cover-up? The lines between fact and fable have blurred, but one thing remains clear. Cleopatra chose how her story would end, on her terms, with the world still watching. The Immortal Queen. From queen to legend. Cleopatra's death did not end her story. It immortalized her. As Rome marched on, the memory of Egypt's last pharaoh refused to fade. Artists painted her as a goddess, writers turned her into myth, and poets crafted tales of her beauty, wit, and tragic love. In death, Cleopatra became larger than life, a symbol of feminine power, seduction, and resistance against empire. The Vanishing Tomb. Despite all the legends, no one has ever found Cleopatra's tomb. Ancient sources claimed she was buried with Antony in a mausoleum near the Temple of Isis in Alexandria. Yet earthquakes, tsunamis, and centuries of decay swallowed much of ancient Alexandria. Archaeologists have searched, temples have been excavated, and rumors abound. But the resting place of the queen remains lost, a final mystery she took with her to eternity. A legacy that defied Rome. Rome may have won the war, but Cleopatra won immortality. Her image lived on, transformed through generations, from Shakespeare's verses to Hollywood's silver screen. She has been painted as a villain, a seductress, a genius, and a goddess. Yet beneath all the interpretations lies a woman who defied two of Rome's greatest men, ruled one of the richest empires of the ancient world, and chose death over submission. The queen who would not bow. In a world ruled by men, Cleopatra refused to kneel. She commanded fleets, influenced empires, and turned love into a weapon. Her life was fire, brief, brilliant, and unforgettable. And though centuries have passed, her spirit still haunts history, whispering a single defiant truth. Cleopatra did not fall. She chose to rise forever. Thanks for watching. Subscribe our channel Storycraft for more interesting videos.